let's hit it. I'm going to hit the. All right. Let me hit it. I'm going to hit. Okay, I think we're probably live now. Okay, we are live. Okay, great. Hello everyone. Welcome. Buenas noches. Bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por estar con nosotros esta noche. Bueno, esta tarde todavía. My name is Professor Mehmet Küçüközar. I am Professor of Sociology in the Behavioral Sciences Department at Dutchess Community College. And I'm also the chair of the Hispanic Heritage Month Committee at the college. Okay, we are. So, okay. And so tonight we're hitting off our the celebrations, the events for Hispanic Heritage Month with an event tonight, a very interesting talk, lecture, the title of which is Teaching Black Feminist Theory, Inspiring Afro-LatinX Trans-Feminist Activisms. And we have two exciting speakers tonight, Ileana Jiménez and Darielle Fernandez, and I'd like to introduce both right now. So starting with Ileana. Ileana Jiménez is a queer Latina feminist teacher activist. For over 25 years, she has taught intersectional feminist pedagogies and curricula to high school and graduate students, as well as teachers nationally and globally. Her doctoral research, I'm reading from the wrong source because I want to give you the full background of Ileana here. So starting again, Ileana Jiménez, queer Latina feminist teacher activist, 25 years of doing that work. She has taught intersectional feminist pedagogies and curricula to high school and graduate students, as well as teachers nationally and globally. Her doctoral research in the English education program at Teachers College, Columbia University is on Black and Latina feminist pedagogies and school-based feminist activism. In 2011, she received a distinguished Fulbright to interview queer and trans youth in Mexico City's high schools. She has chapters in books titled such as Gender in an Era of Post-Truth Populism, Pedagogies, Challenges, Strategies from 2022, and Youth Sexualities, Public Feelings, and Contemporary Cultural Politics, 2018, and has published articles in journals such as Meridians and Radical Teacher, among others. She received her BA in English Literature at Smith College and an MA in English Literature at Middlebury College, and she's present on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so you can connect with her after tonight's event if you're intrigued and fascinated by her work. And I'd also like to introduce Darielle Fernandez, pronouns she, they, is an Afro-LatinX Trans-Femme. She works to bring healing justice spaces to the hood and its most marginalized communities. She's a sex educator, an artist, a healer, a facilitator, and a new graduate from Columbia University with a degree in African American Studies and Education. Congratulations. She works to show people that the hood is a beautiful and magical place full of brilliance and love. Darielle is a kink-positive trailblazer in gender sexuality theory. She loves to think about sex in its most complex and raw form. Her passion is diving into the connection Black trans people have with horror, consent, and kinkiness. She's an engaging and funny facilitator who will leave you questioning the sex-based values you take for granted. So without further ado or more talk from me, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers. Again, so Ileana and Darielle, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm really just honored to be here, to be invited, that my former student and continuing solidarity sister, Darielle, is here to present alongside each other. I can't do this work without my students. And even if they're no longer my current students, they continue to be we walk together. So I'm just honored, Darielle, that you're here.
So for a moment, I just want to briefly interject. So we're hoping to get comments and questions from our audience as you're viewing the talk on a chat function, though I'm not sure if it's disabled. I don't see it right now at the moment. Hopefully it will come on very soon. We're looking forward to your questions and comments so that our speakers can respond to them as we go along. But we will open the floor, well, when the talk ends, we'll also have some time at the end to respond to questions and comments as well. Hopefully the chat function is working. So please, I hope, fingers crossed on that. All right, sorry, take it away.
Darielle, do you want to say anything to check in?
Yeah, so hello. It's an honor to be here. I feel like every time someone reads my bio, I'm like, wait, that's me? But I truly such an honor always to be present here with Ileana. I definitely agree. Even though you are not my current teacher, you were always a teacher, a mentor, a guider in my life. I'm ever so grateful for all the spaces and all the growth that you've seen in me, that you've allowed me to have. And I'm always excited to be in your presence.
Same, igual. I wish we could see our audience, but I see them in my mind's eye. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't have the live stream going in the background because I think that's just too confusing for me. So I'm going to be old school and just do my share screen. Okay. Let's see. And of course, after so many years of doing this, we always forget right at the moment when we have to present. Okay. Can everyone see? Can you both see?
Yep.
Slides? Fantastic. Okay. So thank you again for having us. And we're also honored that this is your kickoff event for Latinx Heritage Month at Dutchess County Community College. And it's just really an honor to be in the presence of your community. So the title of our talk is Teaching Black Feminist Theory, Inspiring Afro-LatinX Trans-Feminist Activism. And I am here with my former student, but always solidarity sister, Darielle Fernandez. So I want to give a little bit of background about my work as a high school English teacher. I essentially was a high school English teacher for the last 26 years. And the core of that work was in offering courses to high school students anywhere between 9th and 12th grade. And the majority of the electives that I taught during those 26 years really focused on Black and Latina feminisms. And I did that work across kind of an array of courses. And the core one was my intersectional and women of color feminisms class, which was offered to juniors and seniors. And then I also taught a queer literature class, which eventually became a kind of queer and trans love stories course. I also taught Latinx literature. I taught a course also in memoir writing. And then I also had an entire class focusing on Toni Morrison's elective on Beloved. So all of these classes were taught to juniors and seniors. And I also taught 10th grade for a very long time. And that class really focused on American literature across time and space. So now, after these 26 years as a high school teacher, I am also finishing a PhD at Teachers College in the English education program. And as a part of the work that I'm doing in that trajectory is also offering teacher education courses to really master's and undergraduate students who are interested in becoming teachers. And the courses that I have taught to master's and undergrad students include, again, a critical feminist theories and pedagogies courses where young people are becoming student teachers alongside mentor teachers in the New York City public schools. I've offered courses in English education and other teaching seminars. And then I've also offered courses on gender, sexuality, and schooling. So this kind of gives you both my K through or my high school teaching as well as my feminist teacher education background as an educator. For me, my own origin with Chicana lesbian feminisms was with reading Shari Moraga when I was a first year at Smith. And I'm forever a first-gen Latina student in both my undergrad, master's, and doctoral journeys. But I can't tell my own story without starting with Shari Moraga, because I had taken in my very first year at Smith a Latina and Latin American women writers class. And when I read Shari Moraga's Loving in the War Years, I remember this passage. She writes, "A woman fully necessitated my claiming the race of my mother. My brother's sex was white, mine was brown." And part of what she theorizes in Loving and the Warriors is her own Chicana lesbian feminist identity. And she really gave me the language to understand my emerging queer identity in my early 20s. And I finally found someone who was explaining me back to me in a way that I hadn't ever encountered before in any literature in high school. And this was a part of what my coming into high school teaching was about, was I wanted young people to find themselves in the literature that they were reading rather than waiting until college to have that encounter, if at all. So a part of my own pedagogy is absolutely informed by bell hooks. And part of how she grounds her work in thinking about Black feminist pedagogy is in Black feminist theory itself. And she defines feminism as a struggle to end sexist oppression. And therefore, it is necessarily a struggle to eradicate the ideology of domination that permeates Western culture on various levels, as well as a commitment to reorganizing society so that the self-development of people can take precedence over imperialism, economic expansion, and material desires. So I actually give this definition, or I gave this definition to high school students when I taught the course on intersectional and women of color feminisms. And we would start from this very place. I would ask them, what are your definitions of feminism? And often they would write down very introductory associations, definitions, anecdotes, and often words like equal rights would come in. And then I would slowly kind of dismantle this notion that feminism, that the course was going to be about a kind of like equal rights class, which is not what the course is about. The course was really about how do we dismantle systems of oppression, and how do we do that from radical Black and Latina feminists, women of color feminist standpoints and frameworks. And the starting point here was always bell hooks. And I would ask my students, what are some words that stand out to you? And they would always lift up words like ideology of domination, reorganizing society, self-development of people, imperialism, economic expansion, material desires. These are words and phrases that they would pick up, and they would say, wow, these are not words that I would normally associate with their own definition of feminism. And by starting in these places of bell hooks's phrasing, word choice, they really begin to see, oh, this is a much larger project of dismantling systems that are not only dominating larger structures of government, media, politics, property rights, all of these things. They begin to see domination is all around them. So that's how she then informs her own understanding of feminist pedagogy from a Black feminist standpoint. And what she writes is, my pedagogical practices have emerged from the mutually illuminating interplay of anti-colonial, critical, and feminist pedagogies. And these practices have allowed hooks to engage directly both the concern for interrogating biases in curricula that reinscribe systems of domination, such as racism and sexism, while simultaneously providing new ways to teach diverse groups of students. I think this is really central and core, which is that for bell hooks, her understanding of Black feminist theory is absolutely intertwined with her understanding of and theorizing of Black feminist pedagogy, which is that if Black feminist theory and feminism is about dismantling systems of domination and power structures that are oppressive and marginalizing, then Black feminist pedagogy, by extension, is going to do the same exact work in the classroom and in the materials and in the ways in which we interact and relate with our students and even with ourselves.
Just a question, just for clarification, people might hear anti-colonial and they might think, well, colonial America. Could you specify or clarify what you mean by anti-colonial, and of course, critical, right? Could you also clarify a little bit those two terms for our audience?
Sure. With critical, what we're talking about here is thinking about, again, dismantling systems of power. So when we think about, let's just make this real. Interactions of power are usually within someone or something, or some structure is in a position of authority. And those positions of authority usually are not questioned. this can be anything from the government to media to even school leaders, school administration, university systems, just to make this more relatable. And so when those structures of power are not questioned, what winds up happening is that they perpetuate, these systems of power perpetuate just ways of silencing those who are in positions of subjugation or positions of marginalization. It could be communities of color, communities that don't have access to wealth, communities that don't have access to the same levels of education or even housing, employment, things like that. And so when we are teaching students to be critical, we are teaching them to be critical of those systems, critical meaning to understand that at the root of these structures is power that is dominating. So anti-colonial then by extension is how do we do the work of decolonizing these power structures ourselves, our own mentalities, our own consciousness, because we have been taught within these systems and we internalize the power structure. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're perpetuating racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And so we have to look at ourselves and say, how do we begin to do that inner work to go against these systems within ourselves and within society? So this is actually what she says. She says that this work is the process of self-actualization. So not surprisingly, teachers who are not concerned with inner well-being are the most threatened by the demand on the part of students for liberatory education, for pedagogical processes that will aid them in their own struggle towards self-actualization. So earlier I said, students will sometimes come into my classroom and say, oh, we're going to learn about equal rights. Actually, we're going to do a lot of inner work. We're going to do work on issues of race and racism, issues of gender, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. We're going to do work on class and wealth and socioeconomic status. And we're going to look at sexuality and queerness and, all the different ways in which sexuality will come up. And I know Darielle will be able to speak to that much more deeply. So, part of what the students realize is, in order for me to do this work, I have to look within. And often teachers, especially teachers coming into the profession, don't realize how much inner work they have to do in order to show up for their students so that they don't cause that harm and domination that we really want to dismantle. So at the core of this as well is theories, Black feminist theories, including intersectionality, which was theorized by Kimberly Crenshaw. And intersectionality essentially holds that forms of oppression interrelate, creating a system of oppression that reflects the intersection, like a street or multiple streets coming together. So she coined this term in 1989. In a critical race legal theory article titled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine. So I just want to pause here and say that Kimberly Crenshaw is essentially a critical race legal scholar. Her background is in the law. So when she theorized intersectionality, what she was trying to do was she was in law school and she realized, oh, wait a second, I'm learning theory about legal discourse around race and legal discourse around class, but I'm not learning legal discourse around gender. And so what she was trying to do was name an absence, name an erasure. And for her, that was Black women. She noticed that Black women were erased and invisibilized within the law, which is why she came up with this theory of intersectionality. And she knew that there was a whole genealogy of Black feminists before her who were already naming this. They were already naming that racism and sexism intersect for Black women in particular, especially around violence against Black women. So then she goes on to write in 1989, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. And she also goes on to write in 1991, Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color. And I do want to lift up just anecdotally, not that I was there, but I was in high school at the time. When she writes these articles, particularly in 1991, she's also on Anita Hill's legal team when Anita Hill is testifying against Clarence Thomas. So she's writing about intersectionality right around the time and publishing it right around the time that she's also supporting Anita Hill in her testimony. So I just want to lift that up, that Anita Hill is a living example of what Crenshaw was trying to theorize, which is the intersection of racism and sexism at the same time, simultaneously happening as violence against Black women. So Kimberly Crenshaw is theorizing intersectionality, and then Black feminist scholars today, such as Brittany Cooper, help us to understand what intersectionality not only means, but how to understand it and apply it in our own work. So Brittany Cooper writes that Crenshaw's coining of this term created a major shift in feminist theorizing, since, as an account of power, we've been talking about power, intersectionality takes attention to the particular forms of subjugation and subordination that characterizes Black women's intersecting and multiplicative experiences of racism and sexism within the law. So that's basically what I said earlier, which is that Brittany Cooper is saying, let me just explain intersectionality to you just a little bit more, which is that Black women experience racism and sexism on a multiplicative level. And so what Crenshaw was trying to do was, I need to take account of that in my theorizing so that the law will take account of this in its actual practice. So I was able to bring my students to go hear Kimberly Crenshaw. And one of the most important, or I thought interesting anecdotes that she shared during this talk was that she was as interested in curriculum as teachers are. And that when she was in law school at Harvard Law, she would actually, and she and her peers would engage in debates with their law professors over what the role of race and gender and class in the curriculum should be. I thought this was a mic drop moment for me, because someone like Kimberly Crenshaw was basically saying to her audience, at Harvard Law, we were fighting with the faculty to address race and gender in the curriculum. And I think this is just a brilliant moment, because we as teachers in K through 12 are trying to do this now. And and we've been doing this for years, for decades. So for Crenshaw to say, I was also doing this in law school, I think should reveal to us that this is not just a K through 12 issue, that across our education systems, whether you're in K through 12 or in law school, all of these intersecting forms of power and domination need to be addressed. I was also able to take my students to go hear Angela Davis. And one of the most important things that she also addresses is that she says intersectionality is the most productive form of feminism. And she doesn't mean productive in terms of capitalism or accumulating wealth. What she means by productive is that because you're addressing these intersecting forms of violence, such as racism, sexism, transphobia, these things can't be disentangled from each other. And so if they're already entangled, the most productive form of feminism is to work at them simultaneously and try to dismantle them simultaneously. So this is at the heart of my own pedagogy, which is that it's intersectional, it's interdisciplinary, it's liberatory. I really believe in public pedagogies, as we're doing right now. We're working and talking with the public, a larger public audience. I also invite my students and former students to do that with me. I really believe that digital activism is a part of doing that work. I do believe that students and teachers need to work together in collaboration in dismantling and doing that kind of anti-oppressive work together. I don't think it can be done. It can be done with only students and it can be done with only teachers, but I also really think that students and teachers working together in solidarity is how we move forward. And this is also a really local, national, and global movement of critical feminist teachers, Black and Latina feminist teachers, Indigenous feminist teachers, Asian feminist teachers also doing this work across not only the country, but the world. And so my curriculum itself does not shy away from teaching young people theory. I start with Black and Latina feminist genealogies. This is just a snapshot of some of the Black and Latina feminists that I have taught to students. There's way more. This is just a sampling. Everyone from Sojourner Truth to the Kabayi River Collective, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Patricia Hill Collins, Crenshaw, Gloria Anzaldúa, Shadi Moraga, as I mentioned earlier, Brittany Cooper, Black Lives Matter activists, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi. This is just a snapshot, but I think this is what we need in schools. I'm just going to be very straightforward, which is that we need to be teaching Black and Latina feminist theory in school rather than waiting for higher education courses. So I'm going to tell a little story about Darielle and myself when she was in high school. We're going to just go do a little throwback story. And we're going to meet Darielle when she was in high school and she was doing brilliant work. And
she was also bald.
Also, you were always beautiful no matter what. And you did that beautiful drawing. Look at that beautiful drawing collage that you did when you read The Bluest Eye, and you were teaching us how you were reading Toxic Masculinity in The Bluest Eye. And you were experimenting with all kinds of ways of reading. Do you want to say a little bit about this drawing?
Oh my God, yes. So, well, one thing to credit you, a pedagogical approach that you had that just worked so well that I think should be incorporated much more is allowing your students to succeed in an English course without having to write long essays and papers, right? So allowing us to be fully present and be active members of the class through art, and specifically studio and visual art. So for this piece, it was specifically trying to get at toxic masculinity in the way that we see it in The Bluest Eye. Or was this Beloved?
This was your Bluest Eye drawing of
Yes,
Chala.
obviously the eyes are there. Yes. So essentially, it was the central masculine figure, and with these various hands, and each hand represents this different aspect of masculinity. All is a performative act being done under the gaze of whiteness. These two blue eyes staring at it. So there's this scene in The Bluest Eye. I forgot which character, but it's basically this Black masculine character who breaks open this watermelon and the red juices pour out, and it's this huge scene. And then there's another, I'm gonna try to give a synopsis. There's one hand that's holding a used condom. There's another hand that has a broken bottle in it. There's another hand that is holding the hair of this feminine character. And each one of them is leaking a different fluid. And this fluid pools around this figure, and from it float babies, and the babies are internalizing all of this violence, internalizing all this fluid, and creating this pattern, this legacy of masculinity. And I want you to know, I was saying the same thing back then. And again, a tribute to the 10th grade Darielle would have never been able to do this. But the transition from 10th grade to 11th grade Darielle was a huge transition, right? Now I'm able to name these things and also visualize them, right? This is also an artistic and a holistic practice that I'm I can't believe I did this.
And it's just
I can totally believe that you did this, and you were giving that analysis when you were in 10th and 11th grade. So you were saying pretty much that same brilliant, pointed analysis that you just gave now.
It's just interesting to note that you're talking about The Bluest Eye, while right now in the United States and different parts of the country, they're banning that book from
Yes.
curriculum. So
and The Bluest Eye has been banned for years. So it's it comes up every single year on banned books lists. And I think that's also what makes students even more interested in reading it, is why is this book banned?
For our audience, it's a Toni Morrison novel, in case they're not aware, right? That Toni Morrison is the author of Bluest Eye.
Thank you. And it's about I don't want to give anything away, but it is about a young Black girl who dreams and desires for blue eyes, to wake up with blue eyes.
And I think our audience should ask why a Black girl would dream of for that, right?
Right, and well, it's a system of violence, right? White, patriarchal, colonialist, imperialist.
Well, power also means that defining culture, right? Defining what we value in our culture, defining what we think is beautiful in our culture, right?
Exactly.
It defines every aspect of our reality, right? So power means being able to define reality in many ways, right?
Yeah. And if I get a chance to talk about this later, like beauty has a lot to do with power, right? Prettiness has a lot to do with power, such as the blue eyes and the concept of that being an attractive quality.
That will connect exactly to the blog post that you wrote a little bit later in high school. So Darielle, you took, I think, the majority of the electives that I mentioned earlier.
To be clear,
What was
I
that?
took every course
You took every course
ever offered at
every
Ileana.
course.
3 years straight. If you offered it, I took it. That whole list, I took it.
I'm curious, what school was this?
This is LREI, the Little Red Schoolhouse, and Elizabeth Irwin High School.
And where is this?
It's located in Lower Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
So part of what I wanted to lift up here is that intersectionality and women of color feminisms was one of the courses that Darielle took, and as well as the Latinx literature class, the memoir writing class, and the Toni Morrison course on Beloved. And all of these came together in various ways. And I just want to lift up one anecdote from when Darielle took my intersectional and women of color feminisms class. And I had invited Barbara Smith, who is one of the co-authors of the Black Feminist Statement, which was written by the Combahee River Collective in 1977. And Barbara Smith and other Black feminists of that time wrote this Black Feminist Statement that we read in my Women of Color Feminisms class. And a part of what they're doing in the Black Feminist Statement is essentially theorizing intersectionality even before it was coined as a term before Crenshaw in 1989 and 1991. So this is what I was talking about earlier, which is that Black feminists were already theorizing this intersection. But it was Crenshaw who kind of gave it this other coining of she gave it a term within legal discourse. So she came to our class this is back in the day of Skype. She visited us via Skype. And I don't know if you remember this, Darielle, but you went up to her during class on Skype and you asked her, would you ever revise the Black Feminist Statement to include Black trans women? And she said, yes. And then we went to Barnard and we were able to hear Barbara Smith on a panel. And we were also able to hear her in person. And she took a picture with us. She was on this panel with Kimberly. There's Kimberly Crenshaw sitting right next to her. And it was a really powerful panel. We were sitting in the front row. And as a part of the work that we were doing in class and as a part of attending this event, Darielle was really moved to say, I'm going to make an intervention on this statement, on the Black Feminist Statement. And I'm going to revise it to say, if Black trans women were free, it would mean everyone else would have to be free. Darielle, do you want to say anything about this intervention you made?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came from a very high level of respect and not wanting to be like this novice to Black feminism who was like, boom, you're wrong, because that's not at all where it was coming from. It was truly coming from a place of accountability, right? And a place of care and being like, yes, this is amazing. And let's also understand that statement was situated in the if I say 1900s, that sounds old as hell. That's not what I mean, but y'all know what I'm saying. I'm a Gen Z. But if we think about it in the context of like, when did I do this? Like 2018, so much had changed. And I think we did need to readdress the conversation and readdress the statement itself, because there's a lot more visibility when it comes to transness. There's a lot more, I'm not gonna say there's a lot more violence, because the violence has always been there, but the violence is now becoming open to the public and front and center in a lot of conversations. So I think we did need to address that in all the conversations we were having in class.
Thank you for explaining that. And part of what you also did as part of the assembly that we held as a class was you made this intervention. And then you went ahead and did historical research and current research on Black trans women who are activists. What did you find in that research?
So much. And I continue to do it. I will say I have a historian's heart, which means like once you're here, you're stuck forever. I care so much and having that affective state kind of flow through me. So the person on the screen is Cece McDonald, who used to run the Black Excellence Tour with Joshua Allen, another Black trans person. They were so brilliant. Cece McDonald had been incarcerated wrongfully after protecting themselves from this group of cis straight men who had attacked them on the street for being a Black trans person in open daylight. And it launched them into this, tour around the U.S. To basically address the fact that people were not supporting, not being in solidarity with Black trans people. And when it came time to show up, there was no one else there, even though Black trans people had always and historically put themselves on the front lines for everybody. Like somebody else, obviously, who a lot of people know, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, have interviews where they talk about being at the forefront of like Black Panther marches. And they say, people expected us to be at the forefront. Why? Because we had no rights. So people expected that we were going to be the most willing to put our physical bodies on the line. Because what did we have to lose? Nothing. We had no rights. We had no one was going to stand up for us. So we had to be at the forefront, right? But I think a lot of people took that for granted and continue to do so. So support Black trans folks because we're here always.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I'm going to share, I'm going to make a transition to the piece that you wrote, Darielle, in that class, which is that as a result of all of this, you were reading Black feminist theory, you were researching Black trans activism and activists. You had even reached back even further into history as well. And you said, okay, what am I going to do with all of this? And you wrote this blog post in the class. And, part of what you were doing was I think what you were doing was applying the theory to not only what you were learning, but also to yourself and your own experience.
I agree.
So I'm just going to play just sections of the blog post that you wrote. And this is a recording that you had done maybe like a couple of years ago. So this is Darielle's voice reading sections of this blog post.
I agree with this statement and would also revise it to say, if Black trans women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free. I believe that this is how we will bring visibility to the ways in which Black and brown trans women are one of, if not the most, marginalized of communities. I know that Barbara Smith, who is one of the originators of the Black feminist statement, would agree with my revision because when she visited our class via Skype, she said, "My feminism was always about expanding. We respected justice for all," and continues to speak on how the women she had worked with embraced trans rights and visibility.
And then you went on to read Janet Mock on your own. Do you want to say a little bit about how you found Janet Mock's work and explain this idea of pretty privilege?
Ciao. So what had happened was in my own search for trans solidarity and to find other people who were maybe like me, I think I went onto Google and looked up Black trans women. And of course, you get images such as Janet Mock, you get Laverne Cox, people who I would argue hold pretty systemic beauty standards, like they look a certain way and it impacts their ability to get into stardom, even though I'm sure they face so much. So when I found out Janet Mock, I was like, oh, this person looks really dope. And then I saw that they had actually written an article addressing the same thing that I had encountered when I looked for trans women, which is the ones they were showcasing were ones that looked a certain way, not at all like me, because like I said, bald-headed, no makeup, but still a femme person. So I was like, oh, let me hear what this person has to say. And I do believe that this article was revolutionary and transformative in my life.
Can you say a little bit more about that? How it was revolutionary and transformative in your life?
Yeah, so in the article, Mock addresses how when she looked like a boy, quote unquote, right? When she passed as a boy, nobody ever saw her as pretty. She always fed into the background, the world felt close to her. And once she started physically transitioning, right? So we're talking about taking hormones, having certain gender affirming surgeries, etc. Suddenly it was like the world opened up to her, right? She talks about how it was easier to get a job. It was easier to have people buy drinks for you, open doors for you in every social aspect. La puerta se le abrieron. You know what I'm saying? They just opened for her. And and I say this every time I feel like we have a talk, in high school, I felt I was ugly, I was horny, I was angsty, like I was all over the place. I was stressed, I was depressed, I was dealing with it all. And so having her write about this, it was like, it was one of those aha moments, right? It was the mic drop moment for me where I was like, oh, this is what's happening, right? It's not that there's something wrong with me. It's that I'm coming face to face with cisgender beauty standards that impact every single aspect of my life, right? And now I'm also having to talk about and think through and unpack sex, intimacy, pleasure, affection, relationships in all these different forms, right? Not just romantic or sexual, but also in other intimate ways, right? Friendship, family, right? If I looked a certain way, maybe if I passed, maybe if I was prettier, then I wouldn't be having such a hard time. And that's a double-edged sword, right? And she addresses that, but a lot to hold, a lot to hold.
That's a lot to hold in high school.
Right.
I mean, I think I can certainly identify with some of the points you made when I was in high school, certainly. But the other thing is, it's important for our audience to consider that how we filter what we think. I mean, how mass media, how social media, how they present images to us, and what they promote to us, how that in turn shapes how we see ourselves, and what we idealize and strive for, and how that could be, of course, in itself damaging and destructive and stressful and all those things, right? That there's a marketing quality here that the large business interests can take the trans identity and turn it into something that could be sold if marketed in a certain way, and that could leave out many people who are struggling with their identities in the process.
When you have the ability to pass as cisgender, your safety from transphobia and trans antagonism is more secure. Because you pass as cisgender and thereby fulfill some of the standards of feminine beauty, your gender identity is recognized and validated.
Another section of your blog post.
However, when trans, Black and brown beauty goes unrecognized, the need for validation and visibility of our identities can often drive us, Black and brown trans women, to try to change our bodies, which feeds into the master narrative notion that there is only one way to be a beautiful woman. These changes can be in the ways in which we act or dress. These changes can also happen through receiving operations to make us thinner, more rounded, and ultimately, quote unquote, more feminine. These operations, such as facial feminization surgery, are extremely expensive and continue to feed into systems of imperialist capitalism.
So there we see already, Darielle, you're applying the theories from the class plus your own research together into the analysis you're doing of both yourself and the kind of the images that you're finding and the concepts of pretty privilege and the articles about Janet Mock and your research about Cece McDonald. It's like all of this is coming together into your analysis of imperialist capitalism through a Black trans feminist lens.
Your hoops are popping. I'm so proud to see you so open and cute in your spaces. In this moment, I felt really warm and recognized.
Darielle, can you explain a little bit about what's happening here in this line in your blog post?
Of course. I would like to say that one, I am so dramatic, and this is very much my Scorpio moon, and I apologize in advance. So, as you mentioned before, we had gone to, and it's funny because I still have the flyer on my wall. Every year of college, I kept it there because that talk was so important for me. Y'all can hear me, right? Y'all good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, perfect. So it was the Invisible No More, police violence against Black women and women of color. And then on it, the flyer, it says Black women and trans women to the forefront. And I was like, period. So the people who had came were people who were also sisters in solidarity, folks who knew about the work, had read the books that we had also read. And it was one of the first spaces I had felt affirmed. So when the talk was over, someone had approached me and said this, like, your hoops are popping. I'm so proud to see you so open and cute in your spaces, because they could see that there was a metamorphosis that was yet to come, that was about to happen. And I think that that's what they were naming in that. And it was so good because it felt warm. I felt recognized. I felt seen. And I felt like I got to shine that day. Again, something so necessary for somebody who was struggling, feeling ugly and lonely and unheld. And yeah, shout out to that person, whoever they are.
And thank you for sharing that moment. This is one of my favorite parts of the blog post, because I didn't know that had happened when we were on that trip. And then you wrote about it in the piece. And later you told me what that meant to you. And even hearing it again is so powerful, because you never know what even going beyond the classroom walls is going to do for a young person to help to exactly experience what you just said, feeling seen, held, understood, recognized, warm.
Mm-hmm.
That was an emotional, affective moment you were having on a class trip. And I mean, for me, that is the power of integrating Black feminist thought in the classroom, which is that we would not have been on that trip if it hadn't been for that panel featuring Kimberly Crenshaw and Barbara Smith and other basically Black feminist abolitionists.
And I'm not sure if you remember, but the people who opened the talk was Harriet's Apothecary,
yes,
who were stationed in Brooklyn at the time.
Yes.
And they led us through this activity where it was like, place your hands over a part of your body that needs like affection, that needs touch. And I was like, what do I do if my whole body is in pain? Like, how do I hold all of this? And it was also, and maybe this will show up later, but it was also an awakening, a spiritual awakening in that, like, all in one. It was so much going on. It was so amazing. And I think that's why I keep it on my wall all the time, because it really was a click moment for me. But it made me have to address the fact that there was so much in my body that I was holding on to that wasn't being released, that wasn't being held and affirmed. And I think that changed my trajectory in terms of like what organizations I started working with outside of school, what spaces I decided to be a part of.
You mentioned the name Harriet Apothecary. Could you explain a little?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not going to do justice by them, but I'm going to do my best. All right. So Harriet's Apothecary was this collective of healers. As I mentioned, they were stationed, I think they had multiple sites in the US, one specifically in Brooklyn. They were just fantastic. Like, they centered in holistic healing. It was very much based in like herbal medicine, being in community, like having healing circles, bringing it back to the earth. True. I was such a fan. I am such a fan.
And that was a part of the experience of that night, which is that Harriet's Apothecary led that spiritual healing, touching of self with everyone in the audience. And that's what framed this whole Black feminist abolitionist panel with Crenshaw and Barbara Smith and everyone else. And here we all are in the front row doing that with not only the rest of the audience, but Harriet's Apothecary and ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful moment to have as a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that instead of internalizing all my pain and trying to heal myself alone, my healing had to come from finding people to do the healing with me. People who had an ancestral, institutional, and spiritual understanding of the roots of our intersecting oppressions and the healing activism that must blossom against it.
I feel like this is what we've been talking about.
I was just about to say, it just flows so naturally. Very much that. Very much that.
And this is basically what you've been doing beyond high school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to get to this next part, which is just to say that Darielle and I have done a lot of work together beyond her high school years. And part of what I've been, I am just as in love with Darielle's work as probably everybody else in this audience now. But I feel like we have been traveling with each other since high school in various ways, in various spaces, from high school to other places that you have also spoken at, that I speak at, that I've taught at. And, we keep converging in these ways in which we're doing this work on multiple levels. And I just want to thank you for doing that and imagining that with me. I do have some questions here, maybe for the audience, but just kind of larger questions about schools and how do we, I did this in my own classroom, but how do we extend this even further to classrooms across the country, which is that we're in a moment right now where Black history in general is being erased, and villainizing of critical race theory. Trans students in schools are also being marginalized. There's violence against trans students left and right, not only on the level of policy, but on the level of the body in schools. So, how do we also take into account the Afro-LatinX trans body as well? And, the struggles of the flesh and the ways in which Darielle is agent, witness, provocateur. These are Cindy Cruz's words. Cindy Cruz is a Chicana lesbian feminist scholar who writes a lot about theories of the flesh. And she says, how does the brown body know? The notion of mestiza consciousness based on a construction. But these are the ways in which the brown body becomes agent, witness, and provocateur. And I'm interested in, what you have to say, Darielle, about how do we revise women of color feminisms to include Afro-Latinx trans bodies, trans feminist ways of knowing and being and healing in schools, because you had that experience and then took it with you into college and beyond. And there's a critical race scholar, Christopher Busey, who also writes about like Afro-Latinidad, and he writes about Afro-Latinx and Afro-Latin American kind of theorizing around this idea that Afro-Latinx identities tend to be placed into second tier identities within like a Latinidad kind of communities. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. And so, thinking with you, like how do we move Afro-Latinx trans students beyond second tier status and reimagine teaching pedagogies, curriculum, and activism through Afro-Latinx and Black trans feminist lenses?
You can also argue that indigenous people
absolutely
from what we say what we call Latin America have that same sort of experience of being marginalized further, right, within the Latinx community.
This is a picture of you, Darielle, when we were on Zoom during the pandemic, and you had done a sex ed workshop for the high school students at that time, and you were in college, and you were also sharing your own knowledge of creating interventions in sex ed as well.
Pandemic. Yeah, since high school, I think I've realized that when you navigate this world with an intersection of identities, such as being Afro-Latinx, Black, trans, femme, kinky, queer, et cetera, like FGLI, low, et cetera, it allows you to look at things with a very specific lens and a very specific magnifying glass that allows you to see the faults in a lot of programming that happens to young people. When we think about sex ed, of course, we can name that sex ed is not queer inclusive, but then when you talk about trans and racially inclusive, that is a whole other level. And that's the work I'm trying to do now, even in my current job, which we'll get to.
Well, this is the transition. I'm transitioning to you and your thoughts, your brilliance. I'm handing it over.
Party. All right. Okay, so I do have slides that I'll just share my screen in a little bit. But I will say first, again, thank you so much for the work that you did with younger Darielle. When I met you, I was 14. When they told me I had Ileana's class, I was like, oh no, like people were like, she hates men and she's mean and I was like, nah, y'all were just misogynistic, but that's okay. That's for another time, truly. But I did go in with that intention of like, oh, I don't think this is the teacher for me. Like I wanted White Jane. I wanted somebody who was like gonna be nice. No. I was put in your class for a reason, and then I chose to remain in your class for the following 2 years with intention because I knew that that was a space I needed to be in. As you mentioned before, it wasn't just reading pedagogy, it was also using that pedagogy to unravel our own lives. And that was medicinal. That was so necessary. And that is not the work that a lot of teachers are doing anymore. Why? Because they think, oh, they're too young, they're not ready to hold this. No, this is when you need it the most. Because what it helps young people understand is, one, they're not crazy, and two, that they don't have to do things alone. Right? That in solidarity with other people, in community, in space, you can feel held and affirmed in a way that maybe we feel is inaccessible in every other sense, right? We're taught by this world that we have one family, our given family, and it was my chosen family, who I consider you to be a part of, who helped me up every single time, right? They were the ones who were seeing the metamorphosis when my given family wasn't able to see it, right? Times have changed. We're in a new process now. My family is all the way on board, which I love. But at the time, I needed somebody who can hold space for me, right? I needed somebody who would be there for me. Now let's get into the work. So let me try to share my screen.
I love you so much.
I love you too, for real, for real, for real, for real. And I hope folks understand that I'm very silly, but I'm also professional. So don't play with her. Okay, I'm gonna share this screen. Can y'all see?
Yes. Ah, I love it.
Party. So here, let me press present.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm so glad you have this picture.
All right, we might, I don't know why it's bugging, but it's okay. I think we might just have to do it like this, which is okay. So this first image was from Columbia Teachers College, and Ileana had given me the book, Who Liang is a Mermaid, which I'm currently holding upside down. And in the book, it's ironic because the book I actually am creating curriculum around right now for my 3rd through 5th graders.
Oh my God.
All around spirituality, Afro-Latinidad, queerness, and this metamorphosis, right? The book is all about transformation. It's all about Hu Liang seeing themselves reflected in their community, a very Black and brown community, and finding their mermaidness, right? That magical version of themselves. And then I have this other photo that, I don't know if you want to give the background for this, because I don't remember the title of the person.
Which, the photo that we're on right now, or the photo where you are holding the laptop?
That one.
So that was an event that was held, actually, it's that building downtown in Manhattan. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's like the main, it's like kind of the Department of Education building that they have downtown near where the mayor's office is as well. I'm forgetting right now the name of that building, but it's enormous.
Yeah.
And they had asked local teachers in the city to bring students to share their work, particularly around gender. And I thought, oh, I have the perfect student to do this. And you had already done a lot of that research around CC McDonald and other trans activists throughout history. You also had found a Black trans woman who had been a soldier.
So it was Mary Jones in 1873, who was this. I used it in my thesis in college, so I'm telling you, the work it's all about revisiting. Mary Jones, 1873, was this Black. I'm not gonna say trans because I feel like that's probably not the identity they would have taken, but very gender deviant character who dressed in feminine clothing, and she was a sex worker while also like going to all the Black parties downtown, and she would rob white men's purses. And they caught her one time and she showed up to court fully dressed in her garbs. They have some conversations from court records, but they ended up labeling her in history as the man monster, right? And this is where we start addressing my love for talking about transness relationships to horror, while also relationship to sex and pleasure and kink, because she had a business, right? A lot of people were fucking her, while also, how do we remember her and how is she archived in history? As a monster, right? And how does that now show up in the categories of porn and horror that we see? I'm such a fan. Like let's get to it. You know what? Let's get to it. Okay, so, and jump in if you ever need to, because I talk fast.
Well, the only thing I just want to say is that you did that presentation in Is that called the I forget the name of that building, but you did that presentation to other high school students and teachers gathered in that building as a high school student. And I think what it says on your screen was transcestry. And you were sharing that transcestry in that space.
And
So
I don't have the photo.
And that's a great example of public pedagogy right there.
I don't have the photo, but I had a crowd. Right?
You did.
I was charismatic. Thank you.
Dude, yes.
No, but the point is, like, this work gets to be exciting, right? People see this as, oh, I'm about to be held accountable. I'm gonna have to face my own like internalized biases and what. No, this is exciting work. We should get to be excited about uncovering the histories and the long legacies of Black transness in this country and Afro-LatinX and Latinidad. But that's not the way it's talked about. But that's what I'm trying to bring. So while all of this was happening with Ileana, Ileana's a coworker now. With Ileana, I was also looking outside of that space because once I had a taste of radical Black feminism, I was like, oh, no, I need this in every aspect of my life. So I went to the Torch program with the National Institute for Reproductive Health, where I met a lot of other siblings, right? Solidarity siblings. And this was the first place that I was called pretty. I got to be beautiful. They let me change my name. They let me practice different pronouns. It was so important. I was trained to facilitate I was trained as a facilitator to have conversations about sex, pleasure, kink, racial justice, grassroots organizing, etc. It was so revolutionary. It doesn't exist anymore, but I'm so truly, you know, Ileana, I would come to class just to talk about Torch. Like, it was amazing. It was led by such amazing people. Delane Powerful, Stephanie Zapata. I'm trying to make sure I'm giving my justice. Melissa. I'm missing one more universe. Come on. I will remember at some point. It's true. Outside of this, I was also starting to work with organizations, right? And I wanted to up my healing justice work. So I started doing healing circles with Brown Girl Recovery that was situated in the Bronx, another space that was so important for me to feel held, for me to feel like I could talk about sex, that I could talk about pleasure. So one of the things I did with them is, as a high schooler, I submitted a proposal to the Let's Talk About Sex conference held by Sister Song in Atlanta. I got approved. I beat out like 300 other proposals. I was a young person. The photo's not showing because Mercury is in the shadow period of retrograde. But in the photo, the workshop I led was called What the Fuck I Want, Honoring Gender Expansive Bodies During Sex. I had an amazing conversation, amazing. And again, it's so important that this was coming from a young person, right? Someone who was at the intersections, because it's not about academia. It's not about having the sources. It's about having the lived experience, right? The lived experience is the source, right?
Yes.
That is what was out. And this is all, again, this is like the flowers that bloomed from the buds that Ileana was planting through theory, right? Like, and every time I got the books to prove it, like, I'm serious, and I'll name them. We got Scarlet Letter, which was 10th grade, right? We have Colonize This, 11th grade. We have Loving in the Warrior, Sheri Moraga, as you mentioned, Sister Outsider, both copies, new one and the old. The Red Letter Plays, which we went to see in 12th grade.
Yes.
Called My Back, Gloria Anzeldúa and Sheri Moraga, Beloved, Bluest Eye, and more in my shelves that I cannot find, but they are there. But the point is, this work is about putting those buds into young people, and they will sprout. Even if you don't see it, they're there, right? It's about giving them grace, getting them to build that reservoir of empathy for themselves, for community, for the people around them. I promise it's revolutionary, and it's what I want to do. I got into the Sadie Nash Leadership Fellowship, in the LF Fellowship, and I started a space in college called Black Folks Unpacking. It was a space I was open to basically everybody who's not a Black cis man. So it was Black women, Black femmes, Black masked folks, Black non-binary people, etc., to talk about our lived experience. It was very much reminiscent of consciousness raising groups that were happening a couple decades ago. As you can see, it was a vibe. right? It was all about building that community, building that space in a spiritual sense. And then I realized that I wanted to continue doing this work with young people, right? Just as impactful as Torch had been for me, I was like, no, I got to do this with other young people and continue to spread this out. So this photo up here is a photo that was taken from the Womanhood Project, also in the Bronx. This photo down here was when I actually did the trainings at Torch, right? I went from being a young person to actually leading the summer program with them. So having the next generation of radical reproductive justice activists. This one was also, there's a photo in the back that you can't see, but that was when we did the Healing Our Hoods, a youth program with Brown Girl Recovery. And then this is also from the Womanhood Project. Now in college, I found my gap, right? Ileana talks about finding her gap in pedagogy, in learning. My gap was realizing that even though Black trans people are situated in one of the hardest positions, which is being the most hated and being seen as the most ugly population in America, I'm situating this in America specifically, they're also the most sexualized, right? She-male categories in porn, huge, some of the highest ratings in some of our states, right? And yet no writing, no studies ever done specifically about the sexual lives of Black trans people. Make up such a huge population of sex workers, right? And survivalists, but nothing written about them. And if you're watching this, do not take my idea. This is a mío, right? But I join you. I will join you, right? Please join me. But this is my gap to fill. So in college, I found this. I worked with librarians trying to find everything I could, right? And I'm happy that this happened in college, because in high school, if I would have tried doing this work, I would have been so upset to find out that it was going to have to be me, you know, that there wasn't a work out there that existed that was going to give me the answers. I had to create it for myself, right? All these books are fantastic. And I borrowed a lot of the pedagogy from here for writing my thesis, but they didn't get to the niche lived reality that I needed to feel held, to feel seen, to feel affirmed as a kinky, horny, Black trans, Afro-LatinX person moving on this world. So I opened a study. I had to do the IRB and everything, which is horrible as a young person, because I am a young person. But I also was able to interview 8 fantastic Black trans folks, non-binary folks, who had such different understandings of their sexual lives, but also all came together to say that the way that we as Black trans gender expansive people think about sex is very evolved and advanced in comparison to how non-Black transgender expansive people think about sex, right? That we open up avenues of intimacy and affection that y'all can't even see yet, right? Things that happen for us that nobody else is in tune with, right? And that is what I want to study. That is what I want to dive into, right? Because it has so much to do with horror. It has so much to do with porn. It has so much to do with time and how long we get to be on this earth. It has so much to do with danger, right? Life expectancy for Black trans people, 35 years. If I got 35 years to live, I gotta, as Ileana would say, squeeze the juice out of every emotional, sexual, romantic aspect that I come into, right? And that's why I have a historian's heart, right? I can't find somebody and let them go because, and I'm gonna bring in Sadia Hartman's Wayward Lives, where she does something called critical fabulation. Critical fabulation is when you go back into history and look for the stories of people who are forgotten, and you fabulate critically, right? It's like an estimate of what their lives might have been like, and that is what I do, right? When we think about murdered trans women, I don't want their entire life to be summed up to them being murdered. I'm like, who were they before that, right? What were their sexual lives like? Who were they in love with? How did they choose who to be in love with? That is more interesting to me, right? Than the coward who decided.
Beautiful.
Don't play. I know, and I'm such a fan of myself.
I'm a fan of you. This is beautiful.
I really hope I'm not coming off like egocentric, because I'm not. But
No.
again, it's the fact that I'm like, wow, I can't believe I'm finally doing this, right? This is my dream. Like I'm filling this gap that that people like me at any age need. They need to see us. They need to see these narratives, right? Like, for example, let's see. Oh my God. So Luciferin, who is a Black trans person, right? They wrote, what pleasure looks like. It looks like how I have the most fun when I'm praying. Mostly, I pray through dance and chanting. When I pray, I'm often thinking about women and Black trans people and think about how much I love us. What brings me so much pleasure is that body of love. And that's what I've been able to find in relationships with Black people, with Black women, with Black trans people. Intimacy in deep levels, being loved in ways that no one has loved me before. Once we were getting into their crush's car. She's Black and gender nonconforming and Nigerian. She opened the door for me to get in the car. She waited for me to get in and put the seatbelt on for me. I felt so loved in that moment, so loved, so secure, and so safe. I don't remember the last time someone did that for me. It's that kind of love that means everything to me, right? That's a narrative that deserves to be shared, right? And more of that. I want to hear about the king. I want to hear about the messiness. I want to hear about all of it because it's all valid and important. And what does it do? It counteracts this vision the same vision that high school me was struggling with, that trans people don't get to be sexy in all forms. It don't matter if it was Darielle who was bald-headed and blah, 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 or like who was wearing like jeans and basketball shorts, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. She got to be sexy however she looked like. She got to be desirable and worthy of love and worthy of intimacy at any stage.
Oh my God, this is such a beautiful, I love this. I love this.
So now to situate into what I'm doing now, very much inspired by Ileana. I worked uptown, back in Washington Heights, born and raised, as an LGBTQ equity and community specialist at the organization Fresh Youth Initiatives. And a lot of my values stay the same, right? Regardless if I'm working with kindergartners or I'm working with 12th graders, I'm here to see you as you deserve and want to be seen, right? So I do lead conversations with sex ed with our high schoolers and middle schoolers, and I'm making sure that my curriculum is queer and trans inclusive, right? And radically inclusive when it comes to you get to be seen at whatever form you look like. Sometimes I have young people come to me and they're in middle school and they're possibly trans. Like, I'm not going to tell you what you are because you get to discover that metamorphosis for yourself. But they were like, but who could love somebody like me, right? Why? Because they're indigenous and bigger bodied and tall and at these intersections, and they're like, I'm ugly. And I'm like, no, baby, like, no, right? And because they're seeing it from someone who looks like me, right? It's different if it's like, no tea, no shade, but like a white twink who's like, nah, boo, like you're cute. Like, no, you need to hear it from someone who can look at you face to face, who is also at these intersections and who gets it, right?
Yes.
That is revolutionary.
Yes.
That is important. And that is why I continue to work with young people, right? Because they don't need to get to college to finally be able to start unraveling the things that I got to unravel, right? And not all schools have teachers and educators like Ileana who are going to offer them classes like this. So what I can do is I can open a space for them, right? And I can lead trainings with their staff members to make sure that their staff members are also not being violent towards their young people and are being inclusive, right? It shows up. All of this still shows up, right? And I know that this feels long-winded, and I know that this is like, she's doing all of this and all of that, but I'm not kidding when I say all of this stems from Ileana's class. All of this comes from reading the Combahee River Collective, Black feminist statement, talking about interlocking oppression when I was 15. You know what I'm saying? It all comes back. This is me showing the flowers that have blossomed out of the buds that's Ileana. Like, truly, that's why I said, you need me, I'm there. Because I don't believe in being in debt, because that's capitalist, period. But I am always honored to be in your presence for this reason, right? You led me down this path, and it is my calling. It is what I have been put on this earth to do.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. We were running out of time. And
I know, and I'm done, so we good.
The final point is extremely important here, okay? Not that only that Ileana is an incredible teacher, mentor, and all that, but that education has the power to be transformative, right? And I think that's why we're here right now, right? Talking about this. That's why we're having this event for our community, because education can be transformative. The question is how? what do we need to do to make it transformative? And I want, of course, our audience to be thinking about that question. And if I can just add, just from what you're speaking, I was just taking notes as you were speaking through, the whole talk, and just certain things that stood out for me about this. When you talk about education, we always think about knowledge, developing knowledge about understanding of the world, but that is so intimately connected to the knowledge of oneself too, right? Understanding oneself, who they are, their place in the world, and that there is a place for them in the world, hopefully. But sometimes that place isn't made. We have to carve it out ourselves, right? We have to push to make those spaces available for us, for some of us particularly who are really marginalized, excluded, made invisible, and therefore we got to take the invisible and make it visible, right? So I think those are some of the key points that, from my understanding of your talk, that I took away from this, and I hope our audience was able to take away, and that's why I'm sharing these thoughts with them. Also about justice work. We're thinking about the legal framework of social justice, right? I mean, if you say social justice, there has to be a legal framework, right? If we're thinking about the legal framework as a mechanism, institutionalized mechanism of bringing about justice, but that requires, as the critical race theorist you were pointing to in your talk noted, that there was no legal framework for understanding the experiences of marginalized communities that experience victimization in our society, right? That experience oppression. So to be able to make them whole, that is, bring legal justice to them, we have to understand those experiences to be able to create a language in our legal system, in our legal framework, to be able to make those people who have been oppressed or who've been experienced oppression, how in our legal framework to be able to make them whole, right? So I think that's important legal aspect, that you mentioned in your discussion. In the legal realm, how do we talk about social justice, right? So I think that was extremely important point that you raised, and so, and also just think about violence and how power can shape every aspect of behavior, every aspect of our lives, including our sexuality, even those intimate moments when we're alone with somebody, having intimacy, that power and domination shape those experiences in ways that we also have to push back against, right? If people want to be whole, if people want to live full lives, they have to be aware through critical historical analysis, as you did, right, in your work, Darielle, that you can begin to push back on all those aspects of power that shape all our lives even at the most intimate moments of our lives, right? So thank you for that. I know there's a lot more to it. Some of the key points that I was able to take away for our audience. I hope to summarize a little bit, at least here at this moment.
I'm wondering, I can't see the chat from the YouTube end. Were there any questions or comments or thoughts?
Unfortunately, no comments or questions, unfortunately. So, and that's why I let it run, so that hopefully, something would show up, but nothing did show up. And we are now past time. Do you want to add any final thoughts? Well, it was a really fascinating discussion that you really had, powerful discussion that you really had here, eye-opening, and I think it helped us, at least for me, reconnect to some of the more important points of what we do as educators, right? To be able to transform people's lives in meaningful ways that not only change their own lives, but everybody else's lives, right? That, I think you also pointed out that talking about trans liberation is also the opportunity to bring liberation for everybody else, right? Not only for people who experience marginalization and exclusion, but also people who are at the center of power. It's also liberating for them as well, right? To remove fear, to remove the shackles of domination that also bind them in many ways, right? I think James Baldwin talked about that too. That liberation of marginalized communities also is about the liberation of people who are within the dominating groups, right? As well. So I think that's something else that stood out for me. Thank you. So again, thank you for your talk. Really interesting, fascinating work. And I hope your I'm glad to see that you're excited by the work that you do. It's good for all of us, I think, in the end. So thank you again. What I'd like to do is just close with our evening and just mention that tomorrow we have another event. This is an art workshop it's an in-person event, this one, in Dutchess Hall 101 starting at 12:30, looking at the art of the azulejo, right? The ceramic tile paintings, right? That have a long historical traditions starting in Europe, but also Middle East. So our artist and teaching artist will present a little talk on the history of the azulejo, looking at the Islamic Middle Eastern origins, as well as its history in Spain, Portugal, and then its history in Mexico and Puebla. And then participants will have the opportunity to create a design that they will then can paint on a ceramic tile, their own azulejo, tomorrow. So please, if you like art, or if you're new to art and you want to try something new, please come. It'll be fun, I promise. All artistic materials will be provided, so just bring yourselves and you can paint, create your own design. So tomorrow, so look forward to that. Thank you again to our speakers, Ileana Jiménez and Darielle Fernandez, for a fascinating discussion about the work that they do, the research they have done, are doing. And if you're interested in following more about them, you're on the social media sites, right? Facebook and so on, right? So our audience could follow you and find you there. All right, thank you again.
And for having us as your opening event. And Darielle, you're like my biggest hype person, and I want to be your biggest hype person. So we're going to continue walking in our sister solidarity.
Always. Thank you so much for having us.
You're the best. You're the best.
All right. Oh, good night. And anyway, we'll correspond by email afterwards. So thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Thank you to our audience.
Bye.
Bye.